Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Jacobin Talks. My name is Micah Uetricht. I'm the deputy editor of Jacobin magazine. And if you're watching this, you probably know the drill, what we do here. Several times a week, we do these Jacobin Talks here on YouTube and on Facebook, discussing a given political issue, usually with either a talk or just a conversation with an activist, a writer, an academic, an organizer. And we get some input from you, the viewer, if you are watching this live. So whether you're on YouTube or on Facebook, if you have any questions or comments, I've always been a defender of the more of a comment than a question. Maybe someday when things calm down a little bit politically, I'll pitch that idea to Slate in defense of the comment rather than a question. Give us a question or a comment in the stream, and I will do my best to read as many of them as possible. And as always, please do like this video. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. I think we're short of 50,000. We're closing in on it, but we're a little short. So really, if you're not subscribing yet, please do so right now. If you are listening to this after the fact, or you're listening to it through Facebook, you can just go to YouTube and search Jacobin, find the channel very easily. And also, if you subscribe, you will get a notification for tomorrow's show, another edition of Weekends with Anna Kasparian and Nando Vila. And you will be hearing from Jacobin's executive editor, my coworker, Seth Ackerman, possessor of, as you can see in that photo, the greatest hair on the American left. Apparently, in a recent Jacobin YouTube video, there was a lot of discussion in the chat about Seth's hair. One of the great mysteries of the American left. One that I obviously am attempting to solve daily when I see those beautiful locks of Seth's. So that's tomorrow. Tune in for another edition of Weekends. But today I am joined by my coworker, my co-author, my friend, Meagan Day, staff writer at Jacobin. Hi, Meagan.
Hi, Micah. How are you doing today?
I'm good. So we're going to be discussing the prospect of this Joe Biden presidency, which seems all but assured at this point. I suppose this YouTube talk could take a real turn if we get some late breaking news in the middle of our discussion here, but it seems like it's pretty much sewed up here. So we're going to talk about what that Joe Biden presidency is going to look like. Again, please do chime in the comments. I know that those of you who are watching this have your own thoughts on this Joe Biden presidency, so we'd love to hear from you. So, Meagan, just first of all, how are you feeling about the election results? Have you been on the roller coaster that many people have been? Are you celebrating this Joe Biden victory? What's your mental situation?
I mean, celebrating is a strong word. I would say that my feelings have shifted from apprehension that Trump might win to relief that it appears that he didn't. And that with that shift, another shift has occurred, which is that it's now time to start talking about what a potential Biden presidency is going to look like and how the left needs to organize ourselves into an opposition type formation immediately with as much information as we can assemble about what we think this is going to look like. That's what we're going to talk about here tonight is what we should expect from a Biden administration and how we should comport ourselves given that that's the case. I want to say it before we begin that there has been kind of an injunction on criticizing Joe Biden. I think more so than Hillary Clinton in 2016. I think probably because of the kind of collective experience of criticizing Hillary Clinton and including the mainstream news media, just like allowing for a large amount of criticism of Hillary Clinton to sort of squeak through. And then when she lost, there was a lot of centrist self-flagellation and leftward flagellation as well. So to me, it seems like it's been harder to criticize Joe Biden in 2020 than it was to criticize Hillary Clinton in 2016. There may be other reasons for that. won't go into it right now. I will say, though, that he is a very under-scrutinized potential president. And if you are not Branko Marcetic, our colleague and coworker who has written the book Yesterday's Man, all about Joe Biden, then there's a good chance that you know very little, actually, about his record. It's important for everyone to brush up because it tells us a lot about how he might govern this country.
Yeah, Branko, I think, was personally hoping that his book on Joe Biden would be made totally irrelevant during the primary, the Democratic primary. But perhaps unfortunately, or fortunately and unfortunately, it's more relevant than ever, which you can find on the Jacobin store. It's called Yesterday's Man. So, I mean, yes, I agree with part of what you're saying. I mean, why do you think that is? Why is it? I know that a lot of leftists have said this about Biden, that somehow, despite the fact that we know, if you read Branko's book, if you read about Biden's record, you know that this guy has been at the center of so much of the worst of the neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party, the dominant wing of the Democratic Party, of course, for decades at this point. And as someone who, even apart from the kind of specific policies that he has pursued, which have been pretty reactionary, he also has kind of just a basic political instinct to, whenever he gets criticized from the right, almost like outflank the right, like go further than the right, despite the fact that he is a Democrat, that he's supposed to be this leader of the ostensibly left, opposition party. He sometimes goes further in a reactionary direction than the Republicans. So why do you think that he sort of has skated by in a way that we didn't quite happen for Hillary Clinton in 2016? Is it because people understand or understood that the Trump presidency was such a unique threat to all kinds of things, that we'd seen what 4 years of Trump looked like, and they weren't good, and we decided that we'd prefer a Biden presidency, and so people kind of zip their lip about it? Or is it? I mean, there's probably some degree of sexism there or something, but what is the reason for that?
I mean, yeah, well, we can acknowledge that there's a degree of sexism in 2016. I think that's apparent, but I don't think that's the primary reason at all. I think that it has to do with the fact that centrists really didn't think that Donald Trump would win. They didn't think that he could win. It just offended their sort of worldview too much to really entertain for more than a split second in 2016. And so they were willing to entertain criticism of Hillary Clinton in exchange for other rewards. So if we're talking about the, establishment news media, the rewards would be, eyeballs glued to the television or clicks, right? And obviously various criticism of Hillary Clinton from all different directions was generating that, or just like attention to Trump's criticism and the right's criticisms of Hillary Clinton, the sort of making a spectacle out of it. They went ahead and dramatized that for their own purposes, in part because they just didn't really see Trump as a threat, because it just didn't mesh with their worldview. And then meanwhile, you also had the sort of progressive left, I would say, not the socialist left, but the kind of progressive left that had genuine criticisms of Hillary Clinton and was issuing them in good faith, and I think should have been, and I think it was a good thing, but it has been was very quickly chastened when Donald Trump won, and there was an incredible amount of left punching in 2016. But some people watched that happen and then flooded into the Democratic Socialists of America, for example. I was a part of that wave. I think actually that kind of knee-jerk centrist reaction to blame the left made people very angry and defensive, and probably helped build the organized left. Like if you were around in late 2016, early 2017, the relitigation of the primary went on for an incredibly long time, maybe even into late 2017. And I think it fueled the left, but I also think the organized socialist left, but I also think it chastened progressives a little bit. And so this time around, a lot of people who are even in the Bernie coalition, even people you might say are like good progressives in the Bernie coalition, just kind of tamped things down, kept things to themselves, voluntarily tried to moderate in a way that they didn't in 2016. We struggled with this at Jacobin. We wrestled with this in our editorial meetings. It's like hard to know precisely how deep you want to go or how many buttons you want to push. I think we managed to publish some really important and good criticism of Joe Biden leading up to the election, but we were absolutely chastised for it for the most part when we did it, and not just by centrists, but also by progressives who stood side by side with us during the Bernie campaign, who just kind of were like, shh, not within earshot of voters, right?
Right. And I think that's definitely true. I guess maybe that gets into this sort of broader discussion of why it is that you think that Joe Biden won. Like, what was Joe Biden's electoral victory about? And what was the results of Tuesday beyond the election of Joe Biden about? Because I think those are two different things, right? There's like the kind of anti-Trump vote for Joe Biden that did deliver him the White House and what looks like actually a somewhat comfortable electoral college lead when the dust settles on everything. But there was not any kind of resounding Democratic victory up and down the rest of the ballot. So what are your thoughts on sort of how and why that played out the way it did?
Well, I have an article that just came up today. The article is called "Trump's Culture Wars Were Meant to Distract from the Crisis. It Didn't Work." And this is one theory that I'm sort of playing with for why Biden pulled it off. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. A lot of people have come to the conclusion that this election was a referendum not on Joe Biden, but on Donald Trump. But I also think that Biden did the bare minimum and still coronavirus managed to become his issue, and that he actually did absorb some support, not a ton, but some, and enough to put him over the top, support from Donald Trump, from people who just felt that the president was not taking the issue seriously enough. So in this article that I wrote, I have some anecdotes about Arizona seniors, which I think are useful. I mean, we don't have the data yet to really make determinations. We don't even know officially who won Arizona. Right? Is that true? I can't keep up with everything. I'm pretty sure we still haven't been officially told that Biden won Arizona. But in any case, there was actually a lot of attention being paid to various demographics in Arizona in the lead up to the election. And one of the demographics that got a lot of media attention was Arizona seniors, because they went so hard for Donald Trump in 2016. He won by 13 percentage points. And in one October poll, I think this was an outlier. I'm pretty sure this is not going to be reflected in the final data, but the number was actually inverted in a Monmouth poll from October. And it showed that Biden had like a 14-point lead over Trump with people over the age of 65 in Arizona. And, like I said, we're going to get more data on this soon. And I think we should dive deep into it and try to figure out what really happened. But just anecdotally, is some of the articles that I was reading in the lead up to the election contained, interviews with Arizona seniors about how they felt about the election, why they were leaning Trump or Biden. And so, for example, one woman who said that she had voted Trump before and was planning on voting Trump again, cited as her main reason a desire to see law and order restored, and sort of was concerned about, Antifa and lootings, Black Lives Matter, the smoldering ashes of Democrat-controlled cities and so on. She lives in a retirement community in a suburb of Phoenix that is listed as one of like the top 10 safest cities in America. This is a completely abstract concept. This is a culture.
Isn't that right where you'd storm the Citadel?
That's right. That is the
You're going
Citadel.
straight for the Arizona retirement community home. Yeah.
So then I read in another article, there was an interview with another, again, it's anecdotal because we don't have the data yet, but there was another guy, a senior in Arizona, who had voted Republican in every single election in his entire life, every single presidential election, and was switching to Biden. And when he was asked why, the answer that he gave was that Donald Trump didn't care about coronavirus, and he was personally afraid of getting it. I mean, Arizona was a hotspot state. What state wasn't or isn't, right? But it was hit pretty bad. Actually, incidentally, the Navajo Nation in Arizona was hit very, very badly. So So yeah, Arizona was experiencing some serious coronavirus problems, and this guy is like over the age of 65, and he was like, Donald Trump's actually in our age group, but he doesn't seem to care about the health of people my age, so I'm going to vote for Joe Biden. Of course, Joe Biden had done very little besides project that he understood the gravity of the situation. His promises with regard to resolving the crisis, both the public health dimensions and the economic dimensions, were in some cases ambitious but not very specific, and in other cases specific but not very ambitious, which actually that should be the Biden tagline. You know, nothing will fundamentally change is pretty good, but this is like a runner-up.
My proposal was that it should be the "come on, man" presidency, because I feel like we're going to be getting a lot of that on various fronts. You know, you leftists want me to try to pursue these kind of bold progressive changes. Come on, man! Look at the Senate. Come on, man! Can't do it.
Yeah, and I want to get into that later about the possibility of a McConnell-led Senate and what Biden's behavior might look like in that scenario. I think you're right. Okay, so we have 3 very good taglines for Joe Biden, and the one that I just floated is, specific but not ambitious, comma, semicolon, ambitious but not specific. So that was basically the way that he talked about the crisis, but at least he talked about it. I mean, Donald Trump spent the entire summer and fall finding wild-eyed, hysterical, paranoid culture war nonsense to complain about or freak people out about on Twitter, and just like feeding red meat to the most unhinged portions of his base. And for people like, a senior in Arizona, I mean, it's like 1 out of every few seniors in Arizona are just going to be like, yeah, sorry, I care more about my material conditions than I care about your imaginary war against brigades of anarchists or whatever. So Biden was the beneficiary of Trump's failed strategy. I mean, I'm not sure that Trump really had another option necessarily, because he was presiding over a series of very nightmarish interlocking crises that were being laid at his feet. So he sort of had to deflect. But in any case, that's my feeling about why Biden won, is that he was simply not Trump. And I know that that's a relatively common viewpoint to hold, but I think that as time goes on, we're going to see more information about specific demographics in the data, and we can sort of determine easier. We can sort of reverse engineer what we think people were thinking when they headed to the polls.
Yeah, the fact that Biden won with basically no agenda that anyone can speak of, beyond saying, I am not Donald Trump. Don't you dislike Donald Trump? Well, I'm not Donald Trump. I'm anti-Donald Trump. Is something that was very disturbing to me. I mean, it feels like it would be such a layup. I mean, okay, we know that Democrats like Joe Biden are never going to be pushing for policies like Medicare for all, despite the fact that Medicare for all is a wildly popular policy, as poll after poll after poll shows. Like, it's a political winner, but Joe Biden's whole shtick is to not fight for things like Medicare for all. He's actually a steadfast friend of corporations. So no surprises there. In fact, if you remember, he said, of course, that he would veto Medicare for all if it even came across his desk, which is something that is, I mean, that's a development. A lot of centrist Democrats say, well, of course, it would be ideal to have Medicare for all if we could have it, but there are all these political barriers. Joe Biden says, no, there are no political barriers. They're all gone. It arrives on my desk. I veto it anyway. So that's who Joe Biden is. But when Trump, I mean, I think maybe Jamel Bowie in the New York Times pointed out at one point that, like, this could have been a really easy re-election for Trump if he had done some very basic things. I mean, if he had done things like give not even as robust of a like checks, universal checks sent out to all Americans as stimulus under the coronavirus. Not as much as some other countries, let's say, but if he had done 2 or 3 rounds of $1,200 stimulus checks, it wouldn't have been enough to address the scale of the crisis, but people would be in better shape than they're in now. But he couldn't even pull that off. He couldn't pull off anything beyond one $1,200 check. And I feel like if he had done that, he could have sewn this whole thing up. And likewise, if Biden had run on a robust response like that, if he had said, I'm going to give $1,000 or $1,500 or $2,000 checks every month to all Americans throughout the length of the pandemic, I think people would have responded to that. But he didn't run on anything like that whatsoever. I mean, there's sort of like vague allusions to respecting scientists like Anthony Fauci, to just respecting the science generally, to actually taking control of this virus and not letting it run amok in the way that Trump has. But there was no, I mean, there was all just sitting there for Biden to grab and to do a slam dunk on, and he refused. He didn't do it, and now, I mean, someone's asking in the chat. Our friend Robbie Nelson is asking in the chat if that the left should make its top line priority item fighting for something like the $2,000 a month stimulus check that Bernie Sanders and others have backed. I mean, it's very unlikely that a Joe Biden will be willing to pursue such a thing when it would have been of enormous political gain to him during the campaign to propose it, and yet he did not.
Yeah, I think that's right. Look, I think that Trump miscalculated and Biden did the absolute bare minimum to reap the rewards of Trump's miscalculation. So when I say that Trump miscalculated, I mean that he has received a lot of positive feedback throughout his time as president, and actually, in fact, throughout his entire pre-political career, that people really enjoy cultural shadow boxing, I guess you could say, like culture war stuff, picking fights with like Rosie O'Donnell or whatever. That's a throwback. And so I think that he thought, okay, this crisis is not going well. That's why they call it a crisis. And there are mass protests happening right now, which are upsetting people who are in my base. So let's lean into that. And he did that basically all summer. And then there was like no time. It was like a beautiful ombre shade into talking about mail-in ballot fraud. So there was like no time during which he was not like ginning up conspiracies and like feeding, absolute bloody red meat to his base. And he just figured that enough people would care more about that than about the crisis, that it would be able to put him over the top. In reality, what happened was that just a shade more people cared about their material conditions than cared about that stuff. It's still alarming and damning that we have a country where people are actually incredibly susceptible to that kind of thing. I mean, millions and millions of people voted for Donald Trump. Millions of people are buying what he's selling. But I wrote in the article that we just published that I think that, as paradoxical as it may seem, I think that we should see a small affirmation of one of the basic premises that animates our politics being smuggled in through these results, which is that people's objective material conditions are, in more cases than not, which isn't even to say in a large share of the cases right now, in more cases than not, are more important to them than the kind of narratives that are playing out inside their head, including the incredibly deeply politically tribalistic, all-consuming partisan narratives that both liberals and conservatives are getting really swept up in lately. This is what people mean when they're referring to like the polarization of American political life. Liberals are into Russiagate and conservatives are into Democrat-run cities smoldering and sometimes even worse, QAnon or whatever. And just turns out that just enough more people care more about the public health and economic dimensions of the crisis that we're facing than care about that other stuff. And Biden was just the passive beneficiary of that. He did very little to take advantage of it. I think that we don't know for certain if Bernie would have won, but I think that we could certainly imagine that a candidate like Bernie Sanders, who was actually out there taking real advantage of the fact that people had a heightened or acute awareness of their own precarity, their own actual objective material precarity, could have played really well, even in the face of socialism accusations or whatever people say would have completely destroyed Bernie's general election campaign.
Right. I mean, that's all we really have to fight this culture war stuff. I mean, like Donald Trump and the Trumps of the world want our politics to be fought on those terms. He wants to turn all of politics into this kind of culture war. He wants wearing masks to be a culture war. He ran for president and won on owning the libs basically, and not much else. But we on the left have to turn it into a substantive, argue that this culture war stuff is a distraction and actually make a case for a substantive politics that could actually help people. But we didn't see that in Biden. I mean, Biden, luckily people opted to not, descend further into the libidinal pleasures of owning the libs. But they did so just by opting for the sort of like neutral vessel that was Joe Biden. There was not a substantive economic agenda of any kind that was on offer in this election. They didn't choose, that substantive economic agenda over the culture war stuff. They at least said the culture war stuff is, that's not making up for all of that I have suffered and all that the country has suffered since the pandemic. But there was, they didn't, like, again, there wasn't a substantive economic agenda that they chose over that.
Can I also say that I think that if there wasn't a pandemic and economic crisis happening, that the Democrats' playbook would have looked quite similar to Donald Trump's, which is to say to go hard on the culture war stuff. Like, I think that this was like a happy accident for the Democratic Party. And it's not like the Democratic Party isn't given to that kind of thing also, right? In its own way, it has a different character. I would say that the character of the Republican Party's sort of orientation in this regard is to like own the libs, and to like also, if you want to go deep into it, like try to save the world from like a lib driven Armageddon. But like Democrats also have their own culture war stuff that they engage in routinely, and that ranges from like what Republicans like to refer to as cancel culture, all the way to, this sort of like milder form of like just general derision and condescension and a kind of like attitude of like hectoring or scolding that people respond really poorly to. And I think that actually the Biden campaign managed to not indulge in as much of that as you could imagine a Democratic Party campaign doing in a non-pandemic timeline, because they didn't really have to, right? Like they didn't have to. They could just be like, well, he doesn't care about the pandemic. He doesn't care about whether or not you die. He doesn't care about the fact that you're unemployed. And we're not going to be specific about the ways in which we care about that, but just know that we do. And that was enough.
Kale, our producer, points out to me that the counter argument here might be that Trump's voters largely voted for him because of his stance on the economy, whatever that means to people. And I think that's a good point. I saw some data that seemed to suggest that there were a number of people who voted for Trump who associated Biden with shutdowns and not much else. And so of course, we need to shut down the economy, shut down the society in order to stop the spread of this virus. But if you're just making the argument, we're going to shut the economy down and you're not going to offer any kind of, we're going to shut it down and then we're going to pay you $2,000 a month, then you hear that and you're like, well, how am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to feed my family? And so maybe Trump, sort of in despite of his culture war stuff, actually people associated with his stance with a stance for the economy, despite the fact that despite the fact that we know that he doesn't have any his economic proposal is just like, let's just reopen everything and act like nothing's happening, and that's awful and terrible. But when it's up against Biden saying nothing about a substantive economic agenda, it can take hold.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's a really fair argument, actually. But I want to say that in order to actually buy the idea that Trump is the pro-economy candidate, you do have to buy into some of the culture war stuff to begin with. Like, you do have to kind of believe on some level that this is a lib plandemic, that it's like that it's not, maybe you don't have to go full into believing it's a hoax, but that it's overblown and that like sensitive snowflakes or blah, blah, whining, wearing masks and so on, in order to get to the point where you believe that it would be better for the economy to simply ignore the fact that we have a pandemic going on. So I think that these are interrelated issues, and maybe it's just a little more nuanced than, one side is like the economy and the other side is just the culture war. But I do think that there's still a pervasive culture war strain, even in Trump's appeals to being the pro-economy candidate, if that makes sense. But Micah, do you want to move on to talking about like the thing that people are here to listen to us talk about, which is how Biden might govern?
Well, this is what I was going to ask next, both how Joe Biden is going to govern, but then also how people like us, leftists, socialists, progressives who are watching this, how we should see our relationship to the Biden administration. So let's start with the first question. What is it that you think we can expect to get out of this Biden campaign? I mean, I've been thinking a lot about Obama's run for president in 2008 and how we all know how the Obama 2 terms turned out, they not a whole lot of good stuff happened, and there was a lot of wasted opportunities. But he came to office on this kind of vague but soaring, progressive-sounding rhetoric. He raised people's hopes extremely high, and then when he came into office, he had a filibuster-proof Senate, he had the House, and he had the White House, and there was a real opening in the beginning of his presidency for all kinds of stuff to happen. Well, the sky is the limit in many ways. I mean, of course, there were institutional constraints, but he had a once in a generation opportunity to pass some progressive social change and political change, and of course, that didn't happen. He really squandered that opportunity, and his presidency led to large numbers of people realizing that we needed something beyond just electing someone like Barack Obama, which is, I think, why a big reason why we have this nascent left that we do. Of course, Black Lives Matter kicked off under his presidency, Occupy Wall Street, etc. But Biden's presidency is not one that is going to begin on the wings of this kind of soaring progressive rhetoric. In fact, he and his advisors have done everything possible to tamp down expectations of what they're going to achieve. The economic advisor who famously said that the cupboard is bare after 4 years of Trump. I mean, almost like preparing people for austerity under Joe Biden. And then, in addition to that, the unique scenario that Obama was able to govern under is not the one that Biden will be facing. Of course, it looks like the Senate. I mean, the Senate is kind of up in the air in some ways right now, but it certainly won't be a filibuster-proof majority, and it may not even be a Democratic. It looks like it won't be a Democratic majority. So, given all of those facts, what do you think we expect policy-wise from President Joe Biden?
Okay, so there's a lot to talk about here. First, I would say that to be clear that there will be some improvements under Joe Biden over Trump. And I think this is specifically in the realm of, the potential cabinet that Biden's going to assemble. I don't think that Biden's going to appoint very many or even any progressives to his cabinet, but we have to understand that politics is a spectrum, and that, Donald Trump was actually appointing people to lead and staff agencies who had openly professed their intention to undermine the purpose of those agencies. And because Democrats are playing a different electoral game, I don't think that Joe Biden is going to do that. I think that instead he will pick somebody to run and people to staff the Environmental Protection Agency who profess to care about the climate, not people who come from the energy sector, probably. And then furthermore, the National Labor Relations Board is probably going to have people on it who are not, various actors who are known for actually intentionally and doggedly trying to undermine the power of organized labor. Jane McAlevey has spoken about this several times, including to you and me, Micah, on our podcast, The Vast Majority, about how difficult it's been actually to go about securing fair union elections under a Trump NLRB. And so I think that if there's even, and this is in part also because there has been a reversal of some Obama era policies that made it easier to organize. And Jane pointed out that those policies were implemented rather late in the Obama administration. It's not like he was raring and ready to go at the beginning. But in any case, he implemented some things that then have been reversed. And so maybe there will be a reversal of that under Joe Biden. And obviously that would just make it easier to organize in the workplace, which would be better. Same thing for the EPA and climate. I think that we're going to see some things start to turn around. That might mean that they just sort of end up at more or less the level where they were before the Trump asteroid hit. But I think in the case of like labor, for example, it does open up opportunities, political opportunities and political space for us to organize better, differently, bigger, and so on. So I just want to say that first before we then dive into what I think is going to go horribly wrong under the Biden administration, if there is a Biden administration. I just want to clarify that we don't actually know the results. I mean, just because that seems like a responsible thing to do. But I mean, it looks like we're going to have a Biden presidency. So Joe Biden was chosen to be on the ticket with Barack Obama to soften his image as a progressive crusader and progressive reformer. So Obama didn't deserve that image anyway. I mean, there had been glowing coverage of him as somebody who was very canny and and a smartly willing to play ball with elites and power brokers in Chicago. He had gotten, and sort of in Illinois politics and in national politics, he had gotten a reputation for being a compromiser, for being a sort of like Buttigieg type character, actually. And he sort of rebranded for his presidential run, and then that worked with voters, because voters were ready for, like, kind of vacuous hopey changey stuff. But it didn't work, obviously, it contained a kind of threat to bite the hand that feeds the Democratic Party. And so Joe Biden was brought in to sort of soften that image a little bit, and also soften that image with voters who might be older, whiter, more conservative, so on. And so Joe Biden is now riding the coattails of the Obama presidency, which is, I think, also falsely presumed by people to have been a progressive presidency when it in fact wasn't. But just because Obama has this image as being like a relatively progressive president still in the minds of a lot of liberals, Biden has got that sort of shine. So you can see that neither of them really deserve that kind of reputation. But least of all Joe Biden, who was actually added to the ticket precisely because he is a proud, self-avowed third way Democrat. I saw a quote that was included by Bronco in one of his articles, of Joe Biden saying that he really objects to class warfare. He finds the whole thing distasteful. I would challenge that is actually a bald-faced lie. Joe Biden is perfectly fine with class warfare as long as it's warfare against the working class on behalf of the capitalist class, done politely and with great civility, of course. I mean, Joe Biden has long been not only known for his willingness to engage in bipartisan negotiations and compromise, but actually his gratuitous, almost compulsive desire to fork over concessions to the right that nobody asked for. When he was vice president, he would walk into rooms with Mitch McConnell when they were like negotiating for the Simpson Bowls or whatever, and he would be like, who wants cuts to Medicare and Social Security? People would be like, other Democrats, conservative Democrats would be like, what are you doing? We don't need to talk about that right now. Why are you offering this? But this is a tick that he developed early on in his career when he jumped in with the New Democrats and the Clinton wing of the party, where if you're a real grown-up, you know that Medicare and Social Security are on the table, right? That's how grown-ups do politics, is we put everything on the table. And in fact, Kale, do you have that screenshot of that floor speech from Biden in the 90s? Because I'd like people to see it. All right, let's read this together. This is Biden talking about his own record. When I argued that we should freeze federal spending, I meant Social Security as well. I meant Medicare and Medicaid. I meant veterans benefits. I meant every single solitary thing in the government. And I not only tried it once, I tried it twice. I tried it a third time, and I tried it a fourth time. Somebody has to tell me in here how we are going to do this hard work. For the record, this hard work was cutting the deficit without dealing with any of those sacred cows, the sacred cows being the pillars of our welfare system. So this is Joe Biden. This is his political habit. This is his political orientation. This is what we should expect him to personally be inclined to bring to the table.
The troops. He wants to go after the troops. Talk about sacred cows. This guy wants to cut the budget for the troops. What kind of a patriotic American is this?
Well, but Biden, all right. So Micah, do you think that, based on what you've witnessed, that if we ingratiate ourselves, if the left ingratiates ourselves to the incoming Biden administration enough, that he will share power with us, that he will hand us one of his reigns? What do you think?
This isn't a softball at all, Megan. I got to think about this one for a minute. I mean, what you're raising the question basically of like how a left should approach a Joe Biden presidency.
No, first, what should we expect? Like if we are like, and then we'll talk about how we should go about, but like, should we expect for him to, be willing to open the door a crack to us?
Not even, certainly, as we've been discussing, there's nothing in his record that suggests that we should expect anything progressive from him. And even in this changed political climate, even after 2 campaigns of Bernie Sanders, the tepid revival of the American left through organizations like the Democratic Socialists of America, and through the election of socialists like AOC and others from the Squad to office, none of that has changed any of Joe Biden's rhetoric. Joe Biden's rhetoric today in this changed political climate really isn't substantively different than it was in the height of the Clinton years or in the Reagan years or any other time. In the time when he was giving that speech on the floor of the Senate, saying let's cut veterans benefits or let's freeze veterans benefits, and freeze Social Security. I mean, there's absolutely no reason to expect that this guy will treat the left as anything but an enemy to be destroyed. In fact, he made that too clear when he was on the campaign trail. He kept saying over and over, I'm not the socialist. I beat the socialist. I'm not going to vote for Medicare for all. I will veto it. I mean, there is no reason whatsoever to think that this guy is going to leave any door open, any amount, any crack, nothing. Like, this is a guy who is austerity minded, who is a deficit hawk, a guy who, as we haven't mentioned yet during our discussion, played a key role in the pushing us into a war in Iraq and selling it to the Democratic Party. There's no reason to think that this guy has any kind of sympathy to any of the left policy agenda of the 21st century, like Medicare for All or Green New Deal or anything else. And we should approach him with that in mind. That the extent to which anything decent will come out of his presidency will only come to the extent to which we can push him at all, because this is a guy whose entire career is one of fighting and trying to destroy any kind of left and progressive policy agenda.
Okay, I agree with you. And also, there's another sign. I mean, there are many small signs that we've been given that this is precisely the case. And my favorite, most recently, is Kale. Could you put up that thing from Axios? Yeah. So, if you guys haven't seen this, the Biden campaign has announced that because it values all of the senators so much, and would not want to risk a scenario in which, and admittedly, this is actually a possibility, Republican governors would, be able to replace senators who are called away to participate in the cabinet. However, I also want to point out that in this article in Axios, both of the Republican governors of the states from which Warren and Sanders hail have indicated that they would not go about, replacing. They wouldn't call up a replacement who would differ too fundamentally from the politics of the people in question. Anyway, that's a digression. The point is that Biden has announced an informal ban on senators in his cabinet. And many people are speculating, and I think that they are correct, that this is actually just an elegant way to make sure that he doesn't have to add Warren or Sanders to his cabinet, as many people on the left are pushing for, specifically Warren for Treasury and Sanders for Labor Secretary. And he can just say, he made up this rule. It's not written down anywhere. And then he can just say, well, I'm sorry, my hands are tied.
Can't you see him like, he's like sidles up next to Bernie, he like puts his arm around him. He's like, gee, Bern, I would love to have you in the cabinet, but unfortunately I got this dang ban that I can't do anything about it. I mean, you understand how it is.
Come on, man.
Come on, man. Yeah, exactly.
So speaking of come on, man, I want to also point out that we are, like you said, Micah, potentially gearing up for a GOP-led Senate, which I think is not a good scenario for the left. I think I'd prefer for us, if we're going to have a Biden presidency, to have Democratic control over both chambers, because then it really calls the question on what precisely the Democratic Party stands for. But in this case, much as we had to deal with the fact that our entire Democratic Party leadership spent 4 years basically saying, like, what can we do? You know who the other guys are. You know what they're up to. It's Trump. This is the Trump years. You need to lower your expectations, right? I think it'll be maybe less bad, but definitely still a thing, that a Biden presidency would basically rely on repeated invocations of a Republican-controlled Senate. Now, I want to point out that also obstructionism from Republicans is real. Like, it is true. It is true that you can't pass like anything, even minor progressive reforms through a Republican-controlled Senate, because they're a party that likes to fight tooth and nail, right? Would be cool if we had one of those for the left. So I think that's real, but I also think there will be a fair amount of feigned helplessness as well on the part of the Biden administration, because as we talked about what his actual inclination is going to be, I mean, this is a perfect alibi for not trying to pursue real progressive reform of the type that we know is popular. I mean, Medicare for All has supermajority support among Americans right now in the middle of this public health care crisis, which is also an unemployment crisis, which has seen millions of people thrown off of their employer-sponsored health insurance. So little wonder. But yeah, I think that probably we're going to hear the same song being sung over and over again for the next 2 to 4 years. I also think that if nothing big passes in the first 2 years of a Biden presidency, and for the record, if he doesn't pursue an aggressive executive order agenda, which he could also do, but he won't, right? So if nothing really changes for people, then you could see that not going super well for the Democrats. And then you could, that makes it even less likely that Democrats are going to take the Senate, and that just entrenches the dynamic even further. And so basically we're going to have, I think it's probably prudent to describe it this way, a Biden-McConnell coalition government. And there's plenty of evidence for what that looks like in recent American history, because Biden and McConnell, Biden and McConnell have a history together. And the history looks like Joe Biden walking into rooms where Mitch McConnell is sitting and saying, hey, do you want to I'll just give you several months of unemployment insurance. We'll shave it off for you, or like trade agreements or whatever. I mean, and McConnell being like, excellent, thank you. I love this guy. So I think that that's what we should be prepared for, which I think sounds rather grim. I don't mean to be pessimistic. I'm trying to be realistic, because I think that we need to figure out what we're prepared for so that we know what kind of political orientation the left should have toward this administration.
Yeah, so let me read 2 comments in the chat that are related to the last point you just made. And one is from Nigel Gallagher. Do you think Biden will attack the left within the Democratic Party and broader left, as Keir Starmer is doing in the UK Labour Party? And then let me ask one more question here, somewhat related. Isn't Biden smart enough to know, this is from Leanne Hewitt, isn't Biden smart enough to know that if he does not initiate real reform to address the galloping inequalities of wealth, for one, the discontent of the left behind's driving Trump's base will just latch on to the next right-wing populist who comes preying on their misery with their simple fixes that are not designed to fix anything real? I think Leanne maybe has answered their own question there.
The question is Biden smart enough to understand all of that? That was well put, and I agree with it. Does Biden understand it? I mean, I'm sure that he knows that that's a possibility, but I also think that the dynamics of national politics are such that here's what I think is probably going to happen. Biden can simply decide that his main issue is going to be pushing to expand on the ACA. And that might include, a public option. Actually, the way that Biden's been talking about it recently, it looks like his platform calls for a public option, but the way that he's been describing the public option that he has in mind during debates and on the campaign trail has been actually just Medicaid expansion in the states that didn't take Medicaid expansion, like a public option for people who qualify for Medicaid in states that didn't expand Medicaid. My God, it's impossible to wrap your mind around. I mean, I think it would help. I think it would genuinely help people, but I think it's obviously a very incremental change. It's far less than a public option, which is itself far less than Medicare for All, which is itself far less than what we actually need, which is an American national healthcare service. So Biden could basically introduce something like that, or Biden could orchestrate the Democratic Party introducing legislation to this effect, his signature legislation for some sort of means-tested public option. And basically the Republican response will be so vicious, and they will cry that this is the final coming of socialism and so on. And that it will force Democrats and just even the progressive wing of the Democratic Party to rally behind this thing. This will be the fight. And it'll seem like it has really high stakes, just like the ACA. And so that way he can actually manage to engage, right? I mean, these are real issues, right? Like if Medicaid was expanded in states that didn't take Medicaid expansion under the ACA, that would actually help a lot of people. So progressives who are good people, who don't want to see people not have health insurance, are probably going to line up behind a fight like that. But you see how the energy would then be drawn into that fight. And it's like the arena would be really shrunken. And I could see that being the strategy to project that he's working on addressing inequality, for example. I don't know if it'll work, but I'll just say that that's my prediction for what the strategy would be to appease the masses of people who care about, as you put it, the galloping inequalities of wealth. I like that.
And what about this question of whether or not a Biden administration would do a Keir Starmer in the Labor Party and go after the left?
That's a great question. I mean, Mike, I want to hear you answer this too. I don't think so. The Democratic Party is not like the Labor Party in the sense that you don't like. Yes, we the left like have a wedge in the Democratic Party, and we have elected officials who are Democrats who are also Democratic Socialists and so on. But it's not really a bounded constituency in the same way. So I think the dynamics are a little bit different. But already, centrists have indicated just in the last 48 hours that they are planning to if not go on like a full attack. I mean, like the thing that's happening in the Labor Party is like kind of a witch hunt against socialists. I kind of can't really see that here, but I do think that there's a discursive strategy for blaming everything on the left. So I've noticed that in the last 48 hours, basically, because, the results are mixed, right? Like a potential Biden victory for presidency, but an underwhelming performance from Democrats down ballot. So basically, you're hearing simultaneously two contradictory things, which is that the good parts of this outcome, as far as Democrats are concerned, are completely attributable to the decision to be moderate and play the centrist playbook or whatever. And the bad parts are attributable for some reason to progressives and socialists being in the Democratic Party tent, and that, like tainting the Democrat brand or whatever. In fact, Cale, do you want to throw up that tweet that shows Spanberger complaining about this on a Democratic caucus call? Yeah, so this is apparently there was a Democratic caucus call, and Abigail Spanberger, who, by the way, is an ex-CIA agent, neither here nor there, said that like this blame, now you can see, is blaming the losses down ballot, the sort of unexpected losses down ballot, on the demand to defund the police and socialism in particular. So again, good things attributable to centrism, bad things attributable to socialism. It's a two birds with one stone, or two birds with two stones, or maybe no, one bird with two stones from two different sides.
And Spanberger is a Democrat freshman House member from Virginia, and also a former professional anti-socialist, right? I mean, what is the CIA for if not to destroy socialism? Big shocker that she thinks that it's destroying the Democratic Party and it should be gotten rid of.
I want to add that there's that thread on Twitter. If you scroll through it, it sort of has, like, I guess, notes from this call. And there's a Rashida Tlaib put up her dukes. She was like not taking it lying down. She was like, it kind of seems like some of y'all are talking about me. And I'm here to tell you that you can go fuck yourselves, but she didn't say that. But she actually is known to say things like that, though.
We know that's what Rashida Tlaib was thinking in her heart. So we've been sort of talking generally about what the the left under the Biden administration. I mean, I guess if I know you've got some more tangible ideas about the sort of like what the left's the playbook should be under Joe Biden, and what the avenues are that the left should be preparing for a fight with him on are. So why don't you lay out what those avenues are? You're
acting like these are like my special precious thoughts, when in fact they are thoughts
taken from a book that we both wrote together.
I mean, you've really like slid. That's why I like had to ask you an aggressive question midway through, because you really slid very comfortably into the interviewer role.
That's right? That's where I'm more comfortable. I don't really have any good ideas. I just like to ask other people questions about their.
It's not true at all. So. You're too humble, sweet Micah. So in any case, you and I both know that the path forward for the left has to be through building a strong working class movement. That I like the way that Matt Karp put it on one of these streams a couple of days ago, which is like, in the Biden administration, we should not prepare to do indoor politics. We should prepare to do outdoor politics. Indoor politics will only get us so far, as we just discussed.
I can just say real quick, though, yes, Matt Karp's formulation about that was good, but Matt Karp also suggested that we put money on Texas going blue, and I put $50 on Texas going blue based on Matt Karp's suggestion, and I lost $50.
So right. Calls into question the wisdom of the whole outdoor politics strategy. No, I mean, True. I think that he's completely right, which is that it's not that things are hopeless under a Biden administration. It's that the path to getting the Biden administration's attention is to create political crises that it would be forced to respond to on its own terms, for its own self-interested reasons, right? Which is not impossible at all. Of course, it's not impossible. The vast majority of people want the kinds of things that the Biden administration is not planning to voluntarily give them. So it's just a matter of organizing, just a simple matter of organizing the American working class. I do think that, I came up with a formulation just off the top of my head the other day for sort of 3 projects that we should be committed to. Maybe this is really obvious to people, maybe not, which is that we should be focusing on the following 3 things. We should be focusing on building the labor movement and taking advantage of if there's new political space opened up under a Biden administration, just procedurally, for growing and expanding and empowering the labor movement. We should be taking advantage of it. Micah and I have a lot of other ideas about what our orientation to the labor movement should be specifically, but let's just set that aside. Labor movement, very important. Second one is specifically growing socialist organizations, socialist membership organizations. I would say Democratic Socialists of America. The reason why I would say that is because it's the largest socialist organization in the last 50 plus years in this country. And it's where the people are, it's where the energy is right now. So we should grow it and make it better. And by make it better, I mean, specifically, this is a formulation that I got from Leo Panitch and Sam Gindin's book, The Socialist Challenge Today, though I'm not sure that they came up with it, but it's really good. It's the idea that we have now a class-focused organization in something like DSA, but we don't yet have a class-rooted organization. So we need to build, but also vastly improve the character of the Democratic Socialists of America and other socialist organizations, if that's your thing. Though I would recommend DSA for the reasons that I just stated. And then the third one is we need to build our electoral bench. Come one, come all. Like, I think that we should be, cheering on more Justice Democrats, progressives getting into government. I also think that specifically we need to go about getting open Democratic Socialists, who, especially ones who belong to a membership organization like DSA, into government. And then I would add that a really good component of the strategy to consider is that it's better when they're all together. Like, it's the thing that's happening in New York right now of sending socialists to state legislature, and the thing that's happening in Chicago of having multiple socialist DSA members on the Chicago City Council is good, because they can introduce legislation together, they can write editorials together, and they also have each other's back, and they can sort of like keep each other, in check in an environment. They have group identity in an environment where actually there's an imposed identity, which is Democratic lawmaker who takes a lunch break at the same time as all the other Democratic lawmakers. Leo Panitch said this once, and I think it's really important. It's not just that people will twist your arm if you're an elected official. It's also that you spend all your time around these people and you realize that they don't actually eat babies, as he put it. And I think that it's the combination of the two, the arm twisting and the getting to know people and sort of participating in that culture can really make a person drift further afield than we would like. So sending people in together is a good idea. I mean, easier said than done. But anyway, building an electoral, Democratic Socialist electoral bench. What do you think about all of that?
Yeah, on that last point, I mean, as much as the elections the results from the elections on Tuesday were, bad not great, I should say, for the reason that we laid out, there also were a lot of heartening things that come out of it, including the election of a large number of socialists in the state of New York. Still, of course, a minoritarian current within the state legislature of New York, but that's moving apace. The socialist movement in general, in terms of elected officials, is moving. It's slow. It is, it's not a total transformation of any kind of electoral bodies overnight, but it's moving in the correct direction, and the graph is going upwards in terms of the number of socialists who are holding elected office in this country at the federal level, like in the House with the expansion of the squad, and state legislatures all over the place. And we've seen, if you think about it, 3 years ago, no one was talking about a Green New Deal, aside from discussion in a couple places like Jacobin, where you would read about this idea or an idea like it. No one was talking about the Green New Deal. And then Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez pretty much single-handedly put this idea on the national agenda. Now we are talking about it. Now it's an essential part of our political discourse. There are some people who are adopting it. There are many others who see it as something to fight against and to destroy. But it was through a very tiny minority of socialists in elected office that we were able to put that on the national agenda. So even when we are serving in this kind of extreme minoritarian current within our political system, there's a lot that can be done. by socialist elected officials, and we're making demonstrable gains on that front. That's something that people should feel very good about. Of course, the clock is ticking in terms of climate change and all of the other miseries that we are currently living under. But it's something to not lose sight of, and that is where hope is going to come from in the coming years. Certainly, when you've got the ex-CIA agent, saying on a conference call that gets leaked incredibly. I don't know how that got leaked to the press. That we need to never say the word socialism again. I mean, clearly they are gearing up for a fight against the left within the Democratic Party. They are days after Election Day trying to throw down the gauntlet and say no more of this socialism crap. We're not going, they're trying to say that we're not going to do that. They're trying to stop this movement that is the rising in this country. And that is because we are having real successes that you can point to all over the place. It's not because they are scared of or afraid. They'd like to do all this socialist type policies, but we just can't get away with it. If they were politically shrewd, they would be pursuing Medicare for all, given that overwhelming number of Americans in poll after poll after poll say that they back Medicare for all. But that's not what they're doing, because they exist to destroy those kind of progressive policies. So it's essential for us to be prepared to meet these people on the political battlefield. I mean, they understand that to continue to push the kind of politics they want to, they need to destroy the socialist movement. And so it seems like this nascent left should be prepared to meet them on that battlefield.
I couldn't possibly follow that up. Great way to end the call. Thanks, Micah. Let's meet them on the battlefield.
Meet them on the battlefield under President Joe Biden, and don't get it twisted. I mean, it is a battlefield, and that is our task. I mean, personally, I'm very grateful that we're not going to be up against a President Trump for the next 4 years, and we didn't even get into all of the incredible and bizarre distortions that will likely befall us from the right over the next couple of years. I mean, the people who got involved in QAnon and all of these other, militia and other reactionary formations are not going away anytime soon in this country. And I shudder to think about what new permutations they will take in the years to come. But luckily, I think that has been slowed, at least in some way, by Trump's loss. And we know as socialists that in the long term, the way that we beat those kind of reactionary politics is through putting forward our own positive agenda, a real substantive socialist agenda. And the only way we're going to make any progress on that front is if people are ready to go into opposition to a Joe Biden presidency. So I hope people are ready for that. And I will forgot to mention in the beginning of this call that actually we have a new issue of Jacobin that is out right now. It's called Failure is an Option. You can see it on the screen there. And we actually have a reduced rate for New Jacobin subscriptions for Jacobin Talks viewers. And you can click on the link to get a subscription with a discounted rate in the issue description, or the episode description, of this episode. You can also click on Megan's Trump's Culture Wars article. And you can, there it is. Trump's Culture Wars were meant to distract from the crisis. It didn't work. And please be reading JacobinMag.com daily. Megan's there like every day.
Wait. I think my other article actually touches on the other article that I published this week. There you go. That touches on more of what we were discussing. I mean, I think that,
Megan, you just publish so much that it's really hard to keep up.
Keep up, Micah. I think that if you want to read my take on what the coming Biden-McConnell coalition government is going to look like, you should click on that one.
And we also would be remiss to say that if we did not say that you are going to be taking some time off soon, because you're working on a preface to the new paperback version of our book, Bigger Than Bernie: How We Go from the Sanders Campaign to Democratic Socialism. So
now you can see the division of labor in mine and Micah's relationship. I take time off to write the preface, and he gives beautiful pep talks
I'm gonna, for the record, I'm also gonna be taking some time off to work on my section of the preface. It's not just you writing the preface. Don't get that twisted either. So anyway, please do click on Meagan's articles. Please read them. Read jacobinmag.com. And once again, the discounted subscription to our new issue, Failure is an Option, about the failed state that is the United States that we live in. And thanks so much to everyone for tuning in. Thanks for Meagan, and to our producer, Kale. And good night, everyone.
Thank you.